My father used to spin me tales in the evenings, usually when the lamp was turned low and the house had gone quiet. There's one story in particular I could never shake. I suspect it was the earliest story he ever offered me, and it also happened to be the one that explained how his father met his end. But that isn't the reason it stayed lodged in my mind all these years. You know how it is. You hear folks on the radio or gossipers at the diner rambling on about spirits, lights in the sky, things that don't belong in polite conversation. And you think, well, someone's confused, someone's lying, or someone's lost their marbles. You tuck those notions away because the world seems safer that way, at least until something turns up. Some detail, some echo of a story that stitches those unbelievable things together in a way you can no longer ignore. Maybe it happens to you. Maybe you hear another man swear to have had the same strange encounter. Before long, the world you thought you knew isn't quite as small or as sensible as you once believed. My father swore his story was true, swore on the Bible if pressed. I didn't buy it, not as a boy, not for a long time. Not until years later, when I began poking around the early message boards and stumbled upon other accounts, tales uncannily close to his, bits and pieces lining up like matching tracks in the snow. That was when I heard people calling the thing the rake. Father never used the word. He has never touched a typewriter connected to a modem, let alone seen what strangers have chosen to name such a creature. When he needed a word for it, needed anything except that thing, he would call it a skinwalker, borrowing the name from an old Navajo yarn his own grandfather used to murmur on cold nights. But let me tell it to you the way my father told it to me. We were out running the traps late one evening. He'd begin, settling back like he'd already started walking through the memory. Coyotes mostly. We'd get $50 a hide in those days. He and his father lived on a dairy spread in rural Ohio. Coyotes would take a calf now and then, so we'd sweep the property each night. Good money in it too. Some nights, if a deer happened to cross our path, we'd take that home as well. The landlord didn't mind much, and it fed us better than beans again. He'd pause, scratching his jaw the way he always did when shifting to the part that unsettled him. Anyway, we'd finished our rounds and were hoofing it back. We didn't own any truck or tractor to ride around on back then. We cut through the timber like always, and that's when we found it. He would lower his voice here, almost to a whisper. Blood, more than I'd ever seen, smeared up the tree trunks, soaking the brush, ribboning through the creek like it had been poured from a bucket. He would shake his head as though the sight were still in front of him. We figured a pack of coyotes had gotten cornered and gone wild. Sometimes feral dogs mix in and make trouble, but this wasn't that. He'd lean forward, as if confiding something that children weren't meant to hear. See, when a pack hunts proper, dogs, wolves, coyotes, makes no difference. They do it with sense. They single out the weak one, drive it to the edge, and the big one comes out just once. The alpha, quick bite to the throat, clean, fast. Nature keeps its rules. He shook his head. What we found didn't have any rules in it. Looked like something barreled straight into a nursery of deer, A whole den. 3 bodies, maybe more. Heads tossed yards away. Limbs and ribs scattered like someone had been throwing them for sport. Predators don't waste meat. Whatever did it didn't do it for food. He would gulp here, even as an old man. That part rattled him. We didn't understand that at the time. We just saw a mess and figured it needed handling. My dad told me to hightail it home. Thought we had a feral pack on our hands. Father would smile bitterly. But I wasn't going anywhere. I was only 13. I wasn't about to march 2 miles alone through the dark, carrying nothing but a little .22 and a pocket knife. That was the only rifle he could shoot straight back then. My dad had the shotgun, and I wasn't leaving the only real firepower behind. It took some convincing, but at last your granddad gave a tight knot, and we followed the trail of whatever had done that wicked work. We didn't have to hunt for signs. The ground itself led us along. Either that thing had opened a deer like a grain sack and left a river behind it, or it had dragged one all through the underbush. I'd never seen my father frightened before then. Not once. Not until that night. He would pause, letting the memory settle before continuing. We hadn't gone far when the woods began to sound wrong. I've spent a lifetime in forests, here and overseas, and never have I heard such unholy racket. The whole timber seemed to cry out at once, deer bleating in panic, foxes shrieking, birds screeching as if dawn had come with claws. This was well past midnight, mind you. Nothing with sense would have been making noise then. But they weren't just awake, they were running. I saw a flock of birds fling themselves right into a stand of trees, wings smacking bark like they were desperate to escape something on the ground. Then we almost emptied both barrels on a pack of coyotes before realizing they weren't hunting. They were fleeing. They tore past us with their tails down, so terrified they didn't even catch our scent. And then the deer came, then rabbits, then squirrels, foxes, even a few wild hogs, barreling through the brush like dark bullets. Creatures that should have been tearing each other apart were all running the same direction, away. From what, we were too dense to ask. Looking back, we should have understood, should have turned around right then, gone home, forgotten we ever saw that carnage. But curiosity has teeth, and your granddad, well, trouble never had to come looking for him. He marched right into its arms, every time. And me? I wasn't about to let the man who fought through a war walk into danger alone. He'd let out a sigh here, remembering. We came out of the trees into a broad valley. In planting months, it was a soy field, but now it was nothing but bare earth stretching across the moonlight. All the fleeing animals had churned it up, pounded it flat, but right through the heart of the place ran a clean line of blood, untouched. Not a single hoofprint marred it. It was like the entire forest had stepped around that trail on purpose, leaving it laid out as neat as a path in a storybook. We bent low to study the tracks there. They were shallow, too shallow. Whatever made them couldn't have weighed much more than 100 pounds. But weight doesn't mean a blessed thing. I once saw a half-grown bobcat no heavier than a sack of corn nearly take a man's throat out. Light just means it moves fast. He'd wet his lips before continuing. We followed those prints until we reached the rise of a hill crowned by an abandoned schoolhouse. Half the roof had been peeled away by a tornado years earlier, leaving the place looking like a cracked egg. Sometimes vagrants sheltered there, or drifters looking for a quiet corner to poison themselves in. We figured maybe that was what we were walking into. Same poor fool on a bad high, tearing up livestock. That idea didn't last long. About 50 yards out, we heard it. A sound that made the hair on my arms rise, even through my coat. A cry. No, two cries, braided together. One shrill enough to slice the night apart, the other deep and mean as a growl rumbling up from the earth itself, both coming from the same throat. When we crept closer, 20 yards maybe, another sound joined it, a strange, wet ripping noise, like someone tearing newspaper while sloshing a bucket of water from side to side. My father would always rub the bridge of his nose at this part. Your granddad crouched beside me and whispered that once we forced it into a corner, it would lash out. Any creature will. Said the tracks showed only one of them. Probably a lone, mangy dog, maybe rabbit. We do it quick. Catch it feeding, fire the shotgun, and fire again until it stopped kicking. If it got on him, my job was to shoot or stab until it let go. That was the plan. He paused here, always the same long hesitation. So we moved. He stepped forward, and I shadowed him just enough to see over his shoulder. I wish I had looked away. There, crouched over a carcass, was something pale as winter bone, shaped like a man, but perched like an ape, long limbs tucked under it, fingers like icicles tapering into claws. It tore away strips of meat with frantic, jerking motions, tossing aside what it didn't fancy. Blood gleamed on the bricks around it like varnish. My father hesitated. Even mangled, the shape still suggested a person. He cleared his throat to warn it, and for 2 full seconds, the entire world went still. A silence so complete it felt unnatural, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then it turned. The cry it made could have split iron. It launched itself at my father. He fired once. God knows if it hit, but the thing didn't flinch. It tore into him, ripping pieces free as though he were made of cloth. I fired 5 rounds, point blank, the shots punching into its pale hide with hardly a drop of blood to show for it. When the bullets did no good, I beat at it with the rifle butt. It didn't so much as glance my way. What it did to my father, no man deserves to see that done to his own blood. It stripped him like a butchered dressing game. Skin, throat, eyes, scalp, until he was hardly recognizable as the man who raised me. What happened next is muddled. Fear has a way of blurring the edges, but somehow his hunting knife ended up buried in the creature's shoulder, and my father ended up across mine. I ran. ran harder than I ever had, and behind me the forest cracked and split as though a hurricane were chasing me on foot. I burst from the tree line and tumbled into the gravel beside my landlord's yard. He and a few friends were drinking around a fire. They stared as I screamed for help, until one of them asked, "What's that on your back?" They saw before I could answer, saw the flannel my father always wore, saw what pieces of him remained. Then the screech echoed across the clearing. They dragged me inside. Guns were fetched, doors barred, the lights turned on, bright as noon. Someone dialed the sheriff, 15 minutes out. Through the window we spotted the creature drift past the campfire like a pale, crooked ghost. A man whispered it looked like some sort of ape, just as something crashed through the glass. It wasn't the creature. It was the landlord's dog, only the torso tossed inside like a warning. We shoved furniture against every door and frame. From the garage came the sound of metal twisting, glass breaking. Couch and television went up against the inner door. Then the noise stopped. Not the same awful silence as before, but quieter. Pacing, testing, waiting. A pistol was pressed into my hand. I had barely cocked the hammer before a window shattered upstairs, and the creature shrieked from inside the house. We ran to the stairwell. The thing reached it the same moment we did, cracking the door open just an inch before 5 men slammed it shut again. Its hand shot through, long, white, and thrashing. A shotgun barrel found its wrist. One blast, the hand fell to the floor like a dead fish. That blast didn't stop the creature, it only enraged it. The door shuddered under its assault, the wood whining like something dying. We pressed our weight against it, every muscle straining, while on the far side the thing clawed and heaved with an animal fury. Someone shouted for us to duck. A moment later, the entire upper half of the door vanished in a roar of gunfire. Splinters showered down like hail. 2, maybe 3 men emptied their weapons into the frame until the barrels steamed. After that, I lost track of where the thing went. Maybe it fled back through the house. Maybe it drifted out into the dawn. I only know the police arrived to find me still gripping the ragged remains of the door, as if letting go would bring the creature straight back through it. They had to pry me loose at sunrise. The hospital took me in next, and for a long while afterward, I didn't utter a word to anyone. When I finally returned home, the landlord put me to work on his farm. We never spoke of that night, neither of us cared to, but the memories sat between us all the same. On the eve of my enlistment at 19, he poured 2 glasses of cheap scotch, and we sat on his porch. It was then that I asked what the police had told him. Their official line was that some wild beast had wandered north. A wolf, maybe a bear. I asked him how they explained the hand. He blinked at me as though struck. Said the hand never made it back to town. The officer who'd collected it wrecked his cruiser on the county road, killed outright. The severed hand was gone when they pulled him from the scene. Taken by scavengers, they claimed. Those who would even admit such a thing had existed called it a merely deformed bear paw. I never saw the landlord again after that. He disappeared while I was in basic training. The sheriff's department chalked it up to debts and bad company. But I knew better. I wouldn't set foot near those woods again, not even with a whole battalion behind me. But that was a comfort, I told myself, a lie fit for children. Years later, when my mother passed, sorrow loosened whatever grip my father still had on this world. He went back. He went into those woods, alone, as if hunting down some unfinished business. He never returned. The FBI showed up, strutted about, asked questions that didn't matter, just enough noise to satisfy the neighbors. They weren't looking for a man. They were waiting to leave. One night I got one of them drunk enough to talk, slipped him a handful of crumpled 50s. That loosened his tongue just enough. He said they got reports every year. Folks wandering in, never wandering out. And that was all he planned to give me. But before he stood to leave, he scribbled something on a diner napkin. The rake. I didn't know what it meant. Not then. Not until I went digging through the shadows of the internet. And truth be told, I wish I'd never learned.